welcome back to the summit. My name is Alexis, and I am here today with Dr. Margaret Paul. So thank you so much for joining us for what is going to be a very enlightening conversation. I'm very much looking forward to it. A little bit about Dr. Margaret Paul. She is a best-selling author of 12 published books, a relationship expert, and co-creator of the powerful inner bonding self-healing process. She has appeared on numerous radio and television shows, including Oprah, and has successfully worked with hundreds of thousands and taught classes and seminars around the world for over 54 years. Her most recent book is Lonely No More: The Astonishing Power of Inner Bonding. So hello, Margaret. So lovely to be here with you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Alexis. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. This is such a rich topic. We're talking about relationships today, one of my favorite topics, and I think one of your favorite topics. So how about we start off with your experience and your study, then what has led you to believe that learning to love yourself is the foundation for healthy relationships?
Yeah, that's a great thing to talk about. If we are not loving ourselves, if we are what I call abandoning ourselves, and that is like judging ourselves, ignoring our feelings, not taking responsibility for ourselves in many ways, numbing out with various addictions, making others responsible, that's actually the main reason that relationships fail. People get together at their common level of self-love or their common level of self-abandonment. We attract at those levels. So very often two people get together who expect the other person to fill them up, make them feel complete, make them feel safe, make them feel lovable, make them feel worthy. Well, if they're abandoning themselves, they don't have any love to share. If we're not treating ourselves well, if we're rejecting ourselves in various ways, how can we actually share love with somebody else? And so a loving relationship comes from each person learning how to take responsibility for themselves, for learning to love themselves in many ways, learning to fill themselves up with love so that they have love to share with each other. A loving relationship is about the sharing of love. It's not about the getting of love. And so if people get together to try and get love, they're going to each be very disappointed. And they're going to think, oh, I picked the wrong person, rather than I'm not becoming the right person. And so it's so important for people to learn to define their own worth, to learn what loving themselves really means, which means taking responsibility for their feelings in many ways. And this is what the inner bonding process is about, that we teach. It's about learning to love yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, in relationships, financially, so many different ways, so that when we come to a partner, we're filled up, we're happy, we're peaceful, and we're coming to share love, or we're coming to get help from the other person, but not making that person responsible for us.
And one of the things that I love about your work is that in the inner bonding process, then you walk us through a process of learning to love ourselves and practicing that self-love. And, I say that because I think that it's something I've heard for most of my life, love yourself, and see the sticker, the bumper sticker, and you see the magnet and all these things that say love yourself. But it's like, okay, that sounds great, but how do you actually do that? Like, what does that actually look like? What are the behaviors? What are the practices? So this is kind of just diving in right away, but I'd love to glean from you, if you could walk us through these 6 steps of the inner bonding and how those each contribute.
Yeah. So the first step is becoming aware of your feelings. Most of us have learned, like I learned early in my life, not to feel my feelings because there was a lot of pain. Most of us have a lot of pain. We have no way of handling it. So we learn to stay up in our head rather than in our body. Our feelings are not in our head, they're in our body. And so step one is learning to move from mind focus into body focus. I call it having your inner baby monitor on. Like if you have a baby and you want to be a good parent, you don't just put the baby to sleep and go out to lunch. You listen for the baby's cry so that you know the moment the baby needs to be fed or changed or rocked or whatever. It's the same thing on the inner level. We're listening on the inner level because all of our feelings have information for us about whether we're loving ourselves or abandoning ourselves, whether something's going on with another person, whether that person is dangerous or kind, whether there's a situation that might be dangerous or safe. Our feelings, our gut feelings, our intuition lets us know these things. And so it's so important to be present in your body. That's step one, learning to do that. Took me quite a long time to learn to do that. I was totally externally focused on other people's feelings. I was taught that I'm responsible for their feelings and I just have to ignore mine. So it took time for me to get in my body, be embodied. And in step one, we decide that we want to learn from our feelings. That leads to step two. We breathe into our heart. We open to learning. In inner bonding, there's only two intentions. One is the intention to protect against painful feelings with various forms of controlling and addictive behavior. That leads to self-abandonment. The other intention is to open to learning about what your feelings are telling you and what the truth is and what would be loving to yourself and about our false beliefs. Many of us have so many false beliefs. So we open to learning and we teach people how to access a higher form of love and truth, whatever that is for them. Could be their higher self, it could be nature, it could be their concept of God, an angel, whatever it is. But they open to learning with a higher part of themselves that actually can bring in the truth and can be a role model for what is loving to us in that particular situation. And that creates what we call the loving adult. The loving adult is when we're open to learning and we're connected with our higher self. In step three, we go inside. And let's say we go inside and we're feeling really anxious or scared. And so we ask, we imagine that those feelings are like an inner child. And we're asking, what am I doing? Not what somebody else is doing. What am I doing that's making you feel anxious, making you feel scared? What am I telling you? How am I treating you? What am I not doing? See, so we're asking on the inner level and we listen. And with time, that inner self will say, oh, you're criticizing me, you're ignoring me, you're judging me, you're making this other person responsible for me, you're numbing me out, you ignore me, you don't even know I'm here, you don't even know I exist. You just keep ignoring these feelings. That makes me anxious that you're not paying any attention, just like an actual child. And then we go a little deeper to why are we doing that? Because we come from false beliefs. Let's say that inner child says, I'm anxious because you're judging me. You're putting pressure on me. You're telling me I have to be perfect and I have to do everything right. Well, that's going to cause anxiety. Then we go a little deeper and we ask, why are you saying that? And we go to the false beliefs. Oh, I have to judge you and put pressure on you to get you to do things right. And if you do things right, then other people will like you and then you'll be okay. You see, so there's all kinds of false beliefs there that we can uncover. And once we do, we go to step four, which is we go to our higher guidance and we ask, what's the truth about any of the false beliefs? And what would be loving to us in this moment? And we learn to open to that information. And then in step five, we take the loving action. And in step six, we go in and see how we're feeling. And if we're feeling relief, we
Mm.
know we've taken a loving action.
It's so helpful. It's so helpful because it's like, you know, maybe these are steps that folks have walked through, but you're adding this kind of language to then recognize, oh, okay, wait a second. I did feel better after this one time that I decided to go, take a walk rather than forcing myself to continue to work or something when I needed a break,
Right.
as an example. So, um, it's like you're giving us a system for recognizing, oh, but why was that helpful? Like, why did I feel like that? And so I can begin to repeat it. You mentioned earlier, we might attract people at the same level of self-love or self-abandonment. So what about if you're in that place and you're in a relationship and you've attracted at the same level of self-abandonment, right? And so you're in the moment and you're triggered with a partner, and maybe they're coming at you with, a criticism and you're feeling very defensive. So how does this look, say, in a moment when you're triggered?
So again, it depends upon your awareness of your intention. See, if my
Mm.
intention is to control, then I might get angry. That's a form of control. I might judge back and criticize back. I might shut down and withdraw. I might tap dance around and become a people pleaser to try and control that person and hopefully they'll stop judging me. And so there's many ways that we've learned to try and control. None of them work well. They're all manipulative. But if I'm aware enough to choose the intention to learn, I'm going to tune into how it feels to be criticized. It doesn't feel good. And then I have two choices. I can say to my partner, this criticism isn't feeling good. There must be a good reason. And I'd like to understand what's going on for you. I'll open to learning. Or if I think that person is not going to open to learning with me, they might say, oh, don't give me that psychobabble, and just be defensive. Then I would do what we call lovingly disengaging. I would say, this doesn't feel good. This feels hurtful. So I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm going to go in the other room, or I'm going to get off the phone, or whatever it is, and let me know when you're open to talking about this. Those are the two major things that we can do. Unless we know that our partner, I work with a lot of people who have had extreme traumatic abuse.
Right.
And they might go into like a flashback of something might really, really trigger them. And then sometimes it's really helpful to just go to that person, put your arms around them and say, honey, I love you. I'm here for you, and reassure them. But you can only do that if you're staying open to learning in your own loving adult. If you're getting triggered, then you're going to have to disengage and do your own inner work until you can be open. But what happens for most people is they get into it. Somebody attacks you, you attack back, you defend, you explain, you argue, and it just, it just feeds the flames of the conflict, and resolution is not met. Resolution happens when two people are open to learning. And there's no point in talking about a topic like they're arguing about sex or they're arguing about money. There's no point in talking about it unless they're both open to learning. They're not going to get anywhere.
Mm. Thank you. And so, how about for someone who is not in a relationship and they're looking to increase their sense of self love? What does it look like for them to practice this?
Yeah, it looks like them starting to really get present with their own feelings and learn to take responsibility for their own feelings. Learn to connect. See, we don't generate love and compassion. We open to it. That's what spirit is. Spirit is love. Spirit is compassion. Spirit is peace, joy. So much information that can come through. And so we start with learning to be present. for our feelings, learning to connect to our higher self so that we can access what self love looks like.
Mm.
Most of us had very few role models. My parents had no idea how to love themselves. They were not role models for self love. And so when I started to do inner bonding, actually about 40 years ago, I needed to develop that spiritual connection, which I didn't have at all. My parents were atheists. And so I didn't know anything about that. I had to learn it. And I know anybody can learn it if they really want to. It's about being open enough to access that information. It's always here for us. But that's what needs to happen. People need to be willing to feel their feelings, especially your painful feelings. I mean, look around. Look at all the things that people do to not feel their anxiety, their depression, their guilt, their shame, their aloneness, their emptiness, their envy, their jealousy. They do so many things. They eat tons of sugar and processed foods, and they watch pornography, and they're sexually addicted. They're addicted to the internet. They're addicted to television or shopping or work. There's so many ways, video games, so many ways that people have of distracting and avoiding their pain rather than opening to learning about how they're treating themselves and what's happening with others. There's different kinds of feelings. There's the feelings of life. Like if I'm with somebody and that person is being really mean or judgmental or critical or withdrawn or whatever, that doesn't feel good. It feels lonely. It kind of hurts the heart. We need to tune into those feelings and recognize that we're in an interaction with somebody who's not open, who's not being kind, who's not being caring, and then decide what's loving to us. But then there's what we call the wounded feelings, the anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, all of those feelings that we cause. And so if people want to learn and grow and heal, they have to be willing to feel their pain and take responsibility for it.
When you say learning, okay, so I'm thinking about the word learning and what it encompasses. And you mentioned you've been practicing this for 40 years. So, what is the difference that you notice from when you started practicing this until now? Like, how can someone kind of track their progress and also trust this process um, that you're laying out so that it can grow into, well, what you have been able to experience for yourself and help your clients develop too?
Yeah. So before inner bonding, I worked as a traditional psychotherapist for 17 years. I had tons of my own therapy. But, I came like a lot of people, I came from some abuse, and none of the therapies that I had dealt with that. And so at that time, when inner bonding, Spirit brought me and Dr. Erica Chopich inner bonding, I realized how much I had been abandoning myself in my 30-year marriage with my kids, with my parents, my clients, everybody. I had just been caretaking everybody. And what it led to was severe illness for me. I was very ill. And if I would have kept doing that, I would not be alive right now. So one of the things that happened is that I got healthy from practicing inner bonding. And I don't think I ever felt joy until I started to take loving care of myself. And I have so much joy in my life right now. And I have so much peace. I never had peace. I was a very anxious kid. My mother took me to a psychiatrist when I was 5 because I was so anxious. But I don't have that now. And when I do get anxious, I go right in to see what I'm doing or what's happening, and I deal with it right then. And so what it's brought me is, what people want: connected relationships, um, inner peace and joy. My work started to blossom once I started to do inner bonding. I mean, I became able to manifest. And at this time in my life, I know many people my age. I just turned 85 years old. And I know many people my age, they're getting hip replacements and knee replacements, and they have all kinds of illnesses, and they're not very well. And I just feel so fortunate that I learned to take care of myself physically, emotionally, and spiritually, so that my mind has stayed sharp, my energy is high, and I can continue to live a life filled up with love and joy, which I didn't have before.
It's so beautiful and so inspiring. And so, it sounds like in inner bonding, you're a black belt now.
Yeah.
Like you've got some seriously strong muscles. And so, for those of us who are really wanting what you've developed and we're earlier on in our process, and we're like, okay, well, it sounds good, but it's new, right? The muscles aren't really built. So how can we really learn to trust the process and put in the practice with it? Because that's kind of been a theme I'm noticing between some of these conversations I'm having, is that let it be a practice. And that's where we start to really see some different effects in our lives.
Alexis, one of the things that led me to be devoted to the practice is right at the beginning. I was, after I was able to connect to my higher guidance, and I asked her, I said, why am I here? What's the purpose of all this? And she was very clear. She said, you are here to evolve in your ability to love and to manifest your gifts on the planet. That's why we came here as a soul. And I felt it in my whole being that was true. And that was highly motivating for me to stay on this path. To me, it's a process. It's like you have a baby and you're a parent the rest of your life. You don't just have a baby and you're a parent for a year. You're a parent your whole life. And hopefully as a parent, you're learning more and more about what it looks like to be a loving parent with your children. I wish I had known inner bonding when I had my kids. I didn't. And I hope that more and more people learn to take loving care of themselves before they have children, because being a role model of self-responsibility, self-love is one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids. But to see it as a process, a beautiful, exciting, rewarding process. Before inner bonding, I was addicted. I was addicted to anger. I was addicted to sugar, all kinds of junky stuff to avoid my feelings. But since I've been practicing inner bonding, that went away. I learned to take good care of my body. That's part of self-love. That's part of being healthy. And you become very motivated to do that. The thing that motivated me the most was that in order to access your higher guidance, you have to have a high frequency, because they exist at a higher frequency than we do. And it takes two things. It takes being open to learning, and it takes eating clean organic food, because the processed junk lowers your frequency so much. It's so hard on the body that it makes it hard to access that guidance that's actually always here for us. And so I experimented around and found that when I ate really well, it became very easy. And it's a completely different way to live when you know you're not alone, when you know you're always being guided in your highest good, and that you can access that. And that to me is the most motivating thing in the world. I have no desire to eat junk now because of that.
Could you share with us some of the ways that you learned to access that higher guidance, that you started connecting with that higher guidance so that you do have that sense of being led and knowing that you're not alone? How did you begin to connect with that?
Yeah, so it took practice. I started to imagine. Actually, the co-creator of Inner Bonding, Dr. Erica Chopich, had the ability to see higher guidance, and so she introduced me to my higher guidance, which I had been seeing, but I hadn't realized what it was. And
Mhm.
so I started to practice opening to learning, eating really well, and accessing it. And at first, it felt like I was making everything up. It felt like I was just telling myself what I wanted to hear. And so what I did is I experimented. Sometimes I would listen and see what happened, and sometimes I wouldn't listen and see what happened. Invariably, I
That's
found that when
good.
I didn't listen, things didn't go well.
Right. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm just like getting excited while you're saying that because I'm like, oh yeah, that is so good. I'm just even thinking about step one in the inner bonding of the recognition, and I'm thinking about in my life, um, maybe okay, I'm going to think of an example of like being on a date, and then having some sense like, oh, I don't really like how that person, their tone or how they talked to me, and then there's like something in there that gives that feeling. It's a little inner clench, and so then there is that decision right there of like kind of, oh well, I don't know, I'm probably making it up, or actually then listening and there's another direction, right? And so I think that um, the experimentation can, well, that's maybe kind of a more extreme example, but um, I think it's so useful because the big difference now is that, oh, I feel the inner clench and then I want to not just ignore it or think that I'm being too sensitive or something.
Right.
It's like, wait a note, second, that's there for a reason. And so, okay, I already experimented the other direction. It's always an option, right? So it's okay. It's not going away. It's always an option. But I've kind of seen that. So now it's like, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen if I try this other direction? And then seeing what comes from it, which is, I think, where I'm connecting the dots of the practice.
Yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, it takes time to trust that clenching, but that clenching is not out of nowhere. And the part of you that says, oh, don't pay any attention to that. This might be a good partner for me, or I'm too sensitive. We call that the ego wounded self. That's a part that just wants to control. That's the part of us that wants to control. And that part might say to you, well, if we're extra nice or we, listen to what this person wants, then we can get them to change, which is a huge lie. Just a huge
We know it's a huge lie now.
lie. That's right. That's right.
Done the
And
research.
yeah, and that part of us always lies. That wounded part, it
Wow.
actually is in the lives in the lower left brain, the lower left amygdala with the fight or flight mechanism. This is where all these false beliefs are stored, and this is where that part of us that just wants to control everything. And so it'll come and say, look, just listen to this person and listen to what they're saying and do what they want and everything will be okay or whatever. Or I'm too sensitive, and putting down your level of sensitivity, which is a gift, not something to disregard. It's a gift. And you want to be honoring that gift. So if you get that clench, you want to listen to it and say, this is here for very good reasons. My inner soul, this is your soul, this is your intuition, this is your knowing, is
Mhm.
telling me this person is not right for me. And why waste my time?
Mhm. Right. And then after that, it's finding, okay, what happened when I did follow the guidance in the direction that it was trying to guide me? Because it can never force me to do anything. I get to make my choice, right?
Right.
So then, but when I follow it, then I get to see, okay, what came from that? And maybe it could be even a sense of self-esteem, or, I really feel like that's when some of these synchronicities happen. This is how I get my connection. One way I get my connection is the synchronicities. And then I notice right after I did that, oh, a friend calls me or my sister calls me or something like that. And then I have a wonderful conversation, and then maybe we talk about it, and then they can reaffirm what I had just sensed, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, you're sensing the right way." And then so it's like a wonderful moment, and so and then kind of paying attention to those kind of things.
That's right. Yeah. And good things happen when you honor what you feel, what you know, the guidance that you're getting. See, we are all blessed with two sources of guidance. Our soul, and this is what my guidance taught me. We have this big soul. And so we have energy all around us that's watching out for us. And part of that soul is inside. That's the soul that's in the body, and that communicates mostly through feelings. And so we want to attend to those feelings. And the part outside will pop information into our mind, actually into the third eye, the pineal gland. And it'll pop it in through words or through images, maybe through dreams, through what another person says, but it'll find a way to inform us about what's loving to us, what's in our highest good. And so when I have to make a decision about something, I go inside to my feelings and I see, what do I feel about this or that? And then I go to my guidance and I say, what's in my highest good? And when they line up, I've got my decision, and it takes very little time. I make my decisions really quick because
Yeah.
I know when it's lining up. But if it's not lining up, I'm going to stay with it until it does.
And that's one thing that stands out to me too. Okay, more practice and maybe the decision, it's easier to make more quickly than when
Yes.
you're still in the research phase of the experimentation phase, and then the decision to not follow it takes you down that path for, if we're lucky, it'll only take us down that path for a couple weeks rather than a couple years or
That's
something.
right. That's right.
Because, um, mm. So let's see. Also, what's coming up too is in relation to work, and let's say someone's been in a job for years or a career path that they still feel a sense of uncertainty about. Like, oh, is this really for me? I don't really feel fulfilled. So, and I heard you say when you started practicing the inner bonding, work transformed for you after you started doing this process.
Mm.
So, can you share with us a little bit about that in the work realm?
We all come in with a kind of blueprint in our soul of what we came to offer the planet. And the problem is, what happens with a lot of people is they lose touch with their soul. They think they're that ego wounded self. They don't know that they have this incredible soul in them that knows exactly what would be fulfilling to them. And
Mm.
so, what has happened with so many of the people that I've worked with inner bonding is as they practice the process and they get to know who they are in their soul, their inner child, whatever you want to call that, the information starts to come up and about what they would really, really love to do, what would really fulfill them. Sometimes it is the job they're doing, but the way they're going about it is self abandoning. And sometimes it's something very different. And maybe they need to do something about that, or they need to make it a hobby or an avocation or something like that. But it's in really learning to listen inside to our feelings that we find out why we're here.
Mm. Wow. Okay. So I'm hearing, it could be that the job actually could work for them if the ways that they were self-abandoning with it in the job were able to shift, which it sounds like, okay, some of this stuff starts to shift naturally once these steps begin to get practiced. And it sounds like,
Right.
okay, this happens over time too. So it's something to just let it unfold. Or it could be information. Maybe this is not meant to be my way, my livelihood, but it could be a hobby. It could be these other things. So it's also making me think like, oh, so, okay, if you're getting to know yourself, then are there ways that you could start to practice following your feelings and what you enjoy while you're still in the job? Like, we don't have to say, okay, the job is the issue. You could be practicing these bonding skills and following your feelings. What could I really enjoy that might not even be work related specifically that could help that healing process be going?
Yeah, because if you're doing that, then you're letting yourself know that you matter. And this is what's so important. that we're letting ourselves know we matter. That happens as we listen to ourselves and take action for ourselves. Then we know we matter. But if we ignore our feelings, if we numb out with addictions, if we judge ourselves, if we make others responsible, how do we know we matter? And then what happens is because we're treating ourselves badly, we're abandoning and rejecting ourselves, we end up feeling rejected a lot because so often people will treat us the way we treat ourselves. So, for example, work. Someone may say, I'm really unhappy at work. And then they'll give me an example of a colleague or a boss treating them in a particular way. And then I work with them regarding how they respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
See, and it's most of the time they're abandoning themselves. They're trying to control how that person feels about them rather than taking loving care of themselves. And they find that as they start to take loving care of themselves, suddenly they feel better about the job and their relationships with people get better. And so I always suggest to people don't just leave the job. Like, I don't suggest just don't leave the relationship unless there's physical abuse or intense emotional abuse. But if there's, the regular conflict stuff and you're not happy, do your work first. Deal with your end of the system. Relationships are a system. And so often when people do the work of dealing with their end of the system, the whole system will change. So, like I said, unless there's physical abuse or intense verbal abuse, hang in there, do your work.
Yeah, it really also makes me think I had a relationship with work where I felt like, oh, okay, well, once I don't know, achieve XYZ milestone, then I will be able to do things after work or explore activities that I'd really enjoy, you know? And so I thought in those terms, but and when I was able to instead, start pursuing activities I was interested, like taking even something as simple as like taking a dance class, you know, and started doing that as a took that action, then I realized, oh, I'm starting to enjoy myself, and it's not as much pressure on like what kind of work I'm doing. I thought before I just have to figure out, the perfect work situation and then that's going to give me my fulfillment, but it's like, oh no, there's other ways for me to find fulfillment, and then there's a lot more flexibility and fluidity in some of these other aspects.
Well, and the fulfillment might be in taking loving care of yourself in whatever situation that you're in. Too often people think it's the situation.
Mm-hmm.
One of my role models, I don't know if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was in a concentration camp. And I mean, that's got to be the most challenging thing in the world is to stay connected to yourself, your inner wisdom, stay connected to your higher self, and be there to help other people. And yet that's what he did. That's what kept him alive, is staying inwardly connected, being there for others with his love, with his caring. That's what kept him alive, is listening to himself and caring and being loving. And so even in that situation, he was able to do that. And I have found so often with people, if they think they're in a really terrible marriage or terrible work or something, they really start to listen and take loving care of themselves, then all of a sudden the external seems to change.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm also curious too. So, with the inner bonding process, then this is a process that one can begin to tune into and practice on their own. And at the same time, how can they invite in support around this for themselves and still kind of do this in exchange and in community? Because it's not easy work.
Right. So there are many ways. There people can receive help. We have a fabulous facilitator training program. So we have many facilitators around the world who, if somebody wants individual help, they can get that. I teach a bi-monthly masterclass, and I work with people in laser sessions. I bring people through an inner bonding process. I talk on a topic, and then I do like 4 or 5 brief sessions so people can connect with inner bonding and they connect with each other on the chat. I have a group, other facilitators have groups. We have a fabulous website. People can start to learn inner bonding by taking our free 7-day inner bonding course. Um, there's many ways of getting the support you need. I have a lot of courses that will help people, and like I have like I do intensives and 5-day intensives, and now they're online since COVID. They're online, and in these intensives, sometimes people meet their partner, sometimes they meet their best friend, and sometimes they keep it up afterward, like on WhatsApp, and they create a community. And the same thing happens in my group. People create a community where they support each other. There's a lot of people around the world supporting each other with inner bonding.
So good. So, in our last couple minutes here, what about some places for people to start in terms of some practices? Is there anything that you recommend as like maybe one first step someone can take as a practice to begin with this?
Well, of course, I recommend the first step of inner bonding, which is
Sure.
to get present with your feelings. But even before that, somebody has to be willing to feel
Mm-hmm.
their pain, because if they're not willing to feel their pain, and all the addictions are about avoiding pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're not willing to feel their painful feelings and learn from them, they're not going to be motivated to do the inner work. But if they're willing to learn from their pain rather than avoid it, then they can learn to get present with their feelings, learn what their feelings are telling them, learn how they're abandoning themselves, learn what being loving to themselves would be, and be able to take that action. And so that's what it starts with, a willingness to feel your painful feelings, a willingness to get hurt. So often people say, well, I've got to protect, I've got to control, I don't want to get hurt. Well, if not getting hurt is your highest priority,
Mm-hmm.
then it's a higher priority than being loving to yourself and others. And until you make being loving to yourself and others your higher priority, you won't be willing to do the work.
And then I'm hearing, reflecting on our conversation too, then it's like, okay, so starting there, having that willingness, and then also, being able to see what happens when you follow that willingness and
Oh,
doing that
that's right.
experimentation and then kind of connecting those dots for yourself. Like, okay, that's what it led to. And now there's a little more information and like how can I take care of myself when I
Mhm.
did let myself feel that? So it's really it's beautiful because it's really like simple, but it's also just it takes practice. And I heard you share, it's come through in this conversation too, just coming from this intention to learn about loving yourself.
Right. That's right. And to share your love. Yeah, the intention to be more loving with yourself and share your love with others. When that's your priority, you will learn to do that.
And so you can even be willing to feel that discomfort from an intention of I'm learning how to love myself.
That's
Not
right.
not how to make myself, feel bad and all that, but it's like, no, this is really coming from a deep intention of love for myself.
Well, and to realize that when you abandon yourself and reject yourself, you're making
Right.
yourself feel bad anyway. You're hurting.
Right, right. So good. Thank you so much, Margaret. And so, as we finish up our time together, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience, or anything finally you'd like to bring to this conversation before we wrap up?
I just want people to know that anybody can learn this
Mm-hmm.
if they're motivated. It's not that it's hard to learn, it's just that anything worth learning takes practice to get good at it. And anybody can do that.
Thank you. And how can we learn more about you and your work?
Just go to innerbonding.com.
Done. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. It's just been a joy to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. And it's just an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Alexis.